back with what we believe is our final installment of the 1920s review. Emily, yes, you have a question.
I do, Mr. Mazuka. I was wondering what you could tell us about the Harlem Renaissance and Mr. Marcus Garvey.
Well, the Harlem Renaissance is a wonderful effect, the lost, not the lost generation, of the Great Migration. And Marcus Garvey is a civil rights activist in the 1920s. So, let's start out with the Harlem Renaissance. Obviously, as you all remember from World War I, there was a void in employment due to the soldiers having to go off to war. So this allowed, this was an opportunity for hundreds of thousands of black Americans to make that trek from the South to the North for jobs. And obviously historians call it the Great Migration. Now, besides being met with complete and overt racism in the 20s, a positive side effect of the Great Migration, of course, was the Harlem Renaissance, which is a growth of literature, music, poetry, of a mixture of African and European cultures, and blacks finally get an outlet for their artistic side, because clearly in the South, they're not going to be published, they're not going to have clubs, they're not going to have opportunities for their artistic ability. So what you have in major cities, you'll have black neighborhoods, and they're going to have their own clubs, they're going to have their own newspapers, they're going to have their own following. And Harlem Renaissance has given American culture some of the greatest works in literature and jazz and poetry and art that you've ever seen. Names like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong are synonymous with the Jazz Age, which again, the Jazz Age goes right along with the theme of modern versus traditional. I'm not a musician, I know nothing about music, I can't read music, I don't know how to play an instrument, but what I do understand is classical music, there's a certain order and structure on how things have to work musically. Jazz takes all those rules and throws them out the window. And so the traditionalists were very much against the Jazz Age because of the whole, going against what was traditionally classical music. So that's kind of how that's a great example of jazz, where jazz is more of a modern mix. And probably the most famous club of all in the U.S. Was the Cotton Club in Harlem, where that's where it sort of it's pre-Motown. Where Motown is the in the 50s and 60s, where all the black artists go for music. In the 50s and 60s, in Detroit, Motor City. Well, Cotton Club is where people of the 20s and 30s will get their break from there. Emily, you asked about Marcus Garvey, correct?
I did.
Yeah. Well, gee whiz. Garvey is what we're going to call a civil rights activist. During the Progressive Era, remember we had W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington advocating for black rights. Well, Garvey, the same thing, with his Universal Negro Improvement Association. His deal was for fostering black ownership of their own businesses, and we'll take responsibility for ourselves. And he even got to the point where he even saw in the future that blacks would really not be accepted in U.S. society. He even created a Back to Africa movement, and he was going to literally encourage blacks to move back to Africa, but he didn't really see how that would play out in the back end of it, since a lot of blacks really have no idea where in Africa they descend from, and ultimately he was thought of as a kook, as a very eccentric. But he is a civil rights activist, and although not a long-lived. So Garvey is kind of in line of our civil rights activists. You get more of the serious activists after World War II. Hey Sarah, how you doing, kid?
Could you tell us more about the Lost Generation?
Lost Generation is the label, the writers of the 20s. Now, y'all that read Babbitt or parts of Babbitt or looked at Babbitt or heard of Babbitt. And obviously Babbitt was Sinclair Lewis, and you have most high school students are very familiar with Fitzgerald, with the Gatsby, or Hemingway. Now these are all your lost generation writers, and they're sort of writing on themes of anywhere from this American's obsession with the material world, and ultimately it does not bring you joy, as you read in chapter 1 of Babbitt. The guy's miserable. He just wanted to reach in the book and just take George Babbitt and hit his chubby little face and tell him that the alarm clock is really not that fancy. A lot of themes in Fitzgerald is just the work is people just are not happy, not fulfilled. They're just kind of going through life in a sad existence, even though they on the outside look like they have everything. Hemingway, again, he talks about the realities and cruelties of war, and a lot of themes of masculinity, and a lot of the characters in his book are really like a man's man, not these men of today, which of course Hollywood has demasculinized men in television shows and movies. Where the man used to be like a strong father figure. Not anymore. All you have to do is look at Modern Family and figure out. You know, we love it. Hemingway.
Phil's strong in his own way.
Hemingway would have a very difficult time with Phil. It just
And Cam.
Yeah,
Which one?
Hemingway probably would like Cam better than Phil.
And Manny.
And
Manny's the best.
Manny's done. But on that show, the grandfather, the dad, Jay's more of a Hemingway guy. And so Hemingway's talking about the realities of life and kind of bringing those themes. And like I said, you read in Babbitt with Sinclair Lewis, talking about the whole material world, and then bring in the confusing writing style of Faulkner and reality. And you know, those guys would be your lost generation legends. Hi, Becky.
Well, Mr. Rinzuko, what about the flappers?
Well, Becky, I love the way you phrase that question. Obviously, the flapper is a slang word for the new modern girl of the 20s. And where Scopes trial is the court case that synonymous with modern versus traditional, flappers is the societal example of modern versus traditional. Stemming along with the 19th Amendment, females get the right to vote. They're now in the man's world, and they're going to be comfortable in the man's world. They're going to break free from the Victorian chains that were passed on them from the mothers, and they're going to go out of their way to look completely different, act completely different than A, their mothers expected them to, and B, what society expected them to act and look like. So they cut their hair. Their clothing was no longer the form fitting; it's the loose fitting.
They drove cars.
Not only is it rebellious, but their knees were showing.
Oh my God.
I know. They were smoking in public. They were putting on the lipstick.
Where they
Scandalous. And of course, they were out drinking and carousing with the men of the 20s, and of course in the speakeasies, the legal taverns. And they sort of represented the new modern woman. We're not calling them feminists, but they were definitely the modern woman that we are living in the man's world, and you know what, we can succeed. One myth that I wanted to explain, however, women did work in the 20s, but please don't take away that was the norm. So where women did engage in the workforce, it was not very widespread. Marco, it looks like we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Okay, my question was with regards to science.
Oh, yeah.
What role did it play in the 1920s?
what role did it play? Well, science is sort of an underlying push to the whole modernity of the 20s. A lot of the friction between the modernists and the traditionalists stems from, of course, science and the advancements of science. So I would say it was the root of all of this, with obviously the teaching of evolution, which we talked about already in the Scopes monkey trial. And then you have advancements in psychology with Freud and psychoanalysis. There's a great report in one of our radio broadcasts about Einstein and the theory of relativity advancing in that way. And there's medical breakthroughs with insulin for diabetics.
Woo-hoo.
So science is sort of is what's kind of forcing, and the advancements in technology is forcing Americans to deal with advancing in the modern age rather than kind of staying in the whole stale thought mind process of the Gilded Age. So I would say science is sort of like the accelerant of the modern age. And that's really all we have for the review of the 1920s. Thanks for stopping by, and good luck tomorrow. Take care.
Woohoo!